Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Today I wanted to continue making a series that is looking at the 10 different mechanics that you can block on the Atlas and the buffs to support that the Atlas received for them in patch 3.20. We're going to be looking at Blight today, which is one of the ones that gained the least out of the 3.20 changes. In fact, overall, in some cases, it was actually made a little bit worse. And that's because there's sometimes buggy nodes that provided you with a percentage chance to get 2 Blights within the same map have since been removed. That was patched out after 3.20 because it was causing problems, and the replacement nodes for them aren't particularly all that great. Anyways, it's still something that does have some real support on the tree, and so let's go through it. You'll notice here that I am doing this on the PathOfExile website rather than the more user-friendly POE planner. The reason for that is that the 3.20.1 changes to Blight support on the Atlas passive tree are reflected there, but they are not reflected on POE planner. So if you're looking at POE planner, you will get the week 1 of 3.20 Atlas passives, and there's a bunch of stuff there that's wrong. So Blight has weaker support overall on the Atlas passive tree than either Breach or Abyss have, and I've covered both of those so far. I'll put a link to those down in the description below. There are 36 nodes required to take all of the Blight support on the passive tree. You may or may not want to take all of them. We'll get to that in a sec. Connecting to all of them is a minimum of 22 travel nodes, or it's 24 if you follow the way that I've done so in this video. Now, it is a bit less if your Atlas is already touching the left side of the Atlas passive tree. Now, let's go through the various clusters that you've got and discuss what's available in them. The Southwest cluster has a kind of confusing identity in that it's got some nodes that do one thing, some nodes that do another thing. This is the Blight Packsize cluster with immune response, and also Blight Enchants on maps with Spores on the Wind. Spores on the Wind in 3.19 was in a different place on the Atlas, and the node is just as bad now as it was then. Let's start by discussing Spores on the Wind. So maps found in your chance have a 3% chance to have an area contains a Blight encounter enchantment modifier, and this wheel contains 1% more of this stat as well. This means that every map that you find has a 4% chance, if you take both of these nodes, to have an enchantment on it that functions basically like a rusted Blight Scarab would. Now, this doesn't stack very well with other sources of Blight encounters in maps, and that's why I don't think that this is anywhere near as good as it looks. So you're going to have these two nodes. Your maps have a 4% chance to contain a Blight encounter. Your maps have a 4% chance to contain a Blight encounter. And just to be clear, this 4% chance is rolled at the time that you put the map into the map device, whereas this 3% or this 1% is rolled at the time that the map drops in your map. These don't stack all that well together. If you have a lot of these Blight encounter chance nodes, then these end up being really disappointing because you can't have 2 Blight encounters anymore. And really, I don't think Spores on the Wind is very good. I think the numbers on it are just too bad to justify it, and the small nodes are probably actually better than the large one here. Something very important with this cluster, though, is that it has 2 of the most powerful nodes if you are struggling with Blight on the entire Atlas. Blight Tower Cost is one of those stats that seems quite innocuous, but is extremely powerful. When you sack 40% of this, because there's 2 nodes that do this, it will make it so that your building and upgrading towers is way cheaper. You'll be able to afford 67% more towers than you could afford without these, assuming that you take both of them. And you'll be able to upgrade them further. You'll be able to upgrade them faster during the Blight, which is a huge factor. Basically, these Blight Tower Cost nodes are incredibly good if you are struggling with Blight. These are the sorts of things you might aspire to getting rid of, to unspecking at a later point, but for now, they're really, really good. Then you have Immune Response. Now, this is in a lot of ways the opposite of what you see down here. Blight Tower Cost makes Blights easier at the expense of taking up points that you could have spent on things that gave you more loot. Immune Response makes them harder, and it makes them faster. The payoff is real. They're going to spawn 50% more non-unique monsters, and there's more of that stat available as well, so you get 8% here, 8% here, 4% here, for a total of 70% more non-unique monsters. And they're going to spawn those monsters faster. This makes the encounters meaningfully harder. If your character is strong enough you want to take this, it's going to cause you to get a larger loot explosion centered on the pump, and it's also just going to mean that you can do more Blight encounters per hour. As a result, Immune Response is one of the best nodes on the tree if you can deal with it, but it is also going to cause you to fail more Blights early on in progression. So definitely take these nodes, they're good, but don't necessarily feel you need to take these until your character is really sort of starting to get going. The second cluster we're going to have a look at is the West Outer Cluster. This is Mycelial Swarm and Epidemiology. Epidemiology is for Blight rewards, and this node is very good. Varieties of items containing 3 Blight chests in your maps are lucky is better than it sounds. What lucky means is roll twice and only give you the rarer result. Often, but not always, the more common of 2 rolls will be something that's completely worthless, And in those situations, this is functionally equivalent to just getting an entire additional chest. And when the more common of the two results was still something that was worth a little bit, it's probably not worth a lot. And as a result, this is then almost as good as getting an entire additional chest. So yeah, Epidemiology, really, really, really good node. And you get more of this stat from these small nodes as well. And that means that this cluster is already really good just on the basis of Epidemiology. Now, Mycelial Swarm is next. This is almost always a bad deal if you're playing in Trade League. This allows you to use the Blight map crafting option when it's not available on the Atlas. You know how else you can get yourself a whole bunch of access to Blight? You can do it by trading for a whole bunch of rusted scarabs. Or you can use polished or gilded scarabs, which are also very cheap in this league. For that reason, I don't recommend this if you're playing in Trade League. But if you're playing in Solo Self-Found, it might be just what you need. And there are a couple of niche situations where you might want this in a trade environment as well. Maybe you are running a multiple scarab setup already and you don't have space for more scarabs. Or maybe you're using Stream of Consciousness, which prohibits you from using scarabs. Or maybe you're using Growing Hordes, which causes your scarabs to instead grant pack size. If that's the case, then yeah, you can definitely consider using Mycelial Swarm. It will do something for you. I'm just not certain that it's going to be the best choice for many people in a trade environment. However, the small nodes that lead up to Mycelial Swarm are pretty compelling here. 5% chance on completing your maps to gain a free use of the Blight map crafting option. This is basically a free rusted scarab that's bound to a count, but that doesn't respect the normal scarab limits. And that's where that comes in handy and why you might want to consider taking these nodes. Interestingly, you might even decide that you want to allocate these before speccing into Blight. You might decide that you want to just pop in here, if you're already on the left side of the tree, take 1 node, 2 nodes, 3 nodes, just so that you can start building up a bunch of those Blight uses on the map device, and then run a whole bunch of maps without Blight spec, and then after a while you can swap in to a fully Blight spec'd Atlas once you've got a few of those saved up. We'll talk about this a bit more later when we discuss Wandering Path, but there's an interesting example where some of the small nodes can do the same thing as the large node, but can simply do it better. So keep that in mind for when we get to the end of the video and we start discussing those tree-defining keystones. The next cluster we want to discuss is Fungal Bloom, the West Inner Cluster. Now, this grants you a total of 22% chance to have a Blight in each of the maps that you open, and this is really good. You want to take this, it's really good unless you are absolutely always using a Scarab, in which case you can then trim this section off the passive tree and save a few points. Straightforward stuff here. Next, we'll discuss one of the new clusters, Sturdy Construction. Now, where Immune Response makes Blights harder in exchange for giving you more and better rewards, Sturdy Construction makes them easier at the cost of several passive points. So Blight Towers and their minions in your map deal 20% more damage is a big deal. Ichor Pumps have increased durability is also significant, although actually this one can be a little bit misleading. Normally it's my experience that if you do fail a Blight, 10 additional life on the Ichor Pump probably wouldn't have saved you. And that's because normally once you lose control of a Blight encounter, you have really lost control of it. In a lot of ways, the small nodes here can actually be even better. Blight monsters in your maps take 8% increased damage, definitely will make Blight encounters easier. Note that this is not the same as just the monsters having 8% less hit points or anything like that. This is an increase the amount of damage that they take that is incredibly, incredibly good in the way that it stacks with corpse explosions. If you're playing any sort of build that detonates monster corpses, this is going to make those detonations inflict more damage on blighted monsters. And basically, this is a phenomenal boost to your capacity to beat Blights without increasing the rewards from them. And it wouldn't surprise me if each of the small nodes ends up being as good as the big node. Now, remember that you're getting 24% total of this stat as well. This is going to stack additively with Shock. And I do recommend this if you are inexperienced with Blight and you're wanting to learn the mechanic. But definitely if you allocate this cluster, already aspire to spec out of it. You're going to want to get rid of this cluster as soon as you can. As soon as you get to the point that you feel you are absolutely never failing Blights without it, then at that point you can take these points off your Atlas passive tree and be very happy about doing so. Additionally, when you do this, you'll have a couple of new pathing options to get up to the top of the passive tree that may end up working out better for you than the pathing that we've got here that's required to fit Sturdy Construction as well. Next cluster we're going to deal with is Distilled Fungus. So Distilled Fungus is going to make in-map Blight events meaningfully harder because the bosses are tanky. But in exchange for that, you will get considerably more rewards. Blight bosses will drop an additional anointed jewelry item. Now these will be rubbish, but there is a use for them that we'll get to in a sec. Additionally, the small nodes leading up to it are very good. Blight bosses have a 25% chance to add an additional reward. So when it says add an additional reward, what it means is that instead of getting 2 chests, as you would get by default in a Blight lane that leads up to a Blight boss, you will have a 25% chance to get 3. or given that you'll allocate all of these, you'll end up with a 100% chance to get 3 instead. So it'll be an extra entire chest in every lane that leads to a Blight boss. This is pretty good, but do remember that it's not nearly as good as Epidemiology, and it's only slightly better than some of the small nodes that are in this area as well. This cluster is good, but you definitely want to take it after taking Epidemiology first, because Epidemiology gives you more. Now, what is the use for a coral ring with terrible mods on it that has a bad anoint on it, you might be asking? Well, this is where we're going to answer that with Blight Spawn. Blight Spawn grants chests in your maps a 10% chance to have an oil extractor. These allow you to destroy an anointed item to recover one of the oils that went into that anointment. What you can do is look at the items that drop pre-anointed and have a look and see, does this require a gold oil for this anointment? If the answer is yes, then it is time to feed it into an oil extractor and see if you can get anything from it. If it doesn't require a gold oil, then you can do the numbers as to whether or not it's worth trying this on silver oils as well. And if you're in Solo Self-Found, actually silver oils are probably the one you need more, because Sovereignty is arguably the best all-purpose anoint that you can have, and it is triple silver oil, so it's very hard to get your hands on in SSF. And the combination of Blight Spawn and Distilled Fungus will really help you get there. Additionally, Blight Spawn doesn't only do that. You have a 25% chance for your oils to tier up once. Now, this is always beneficial when this procs, but a lot of the oils are not worth 3 times as much as the tier below them. When they are, this is basically equivalent to 50% more multiplier to the amount of oils that you get. However, in practice, it's quite a bit worse than that, but still pretty good. Finally, Blight Spawn comes with some pretty solid small nodes. 5% increased chance for Blight chests in your maps to contain blighted maps or oils. This isn't free, as it does crowd out some of the other options that could have rolled instead, but these are still among the best options that you're going to get from blighted chests, and as a result, you're always happy to have these nodes on your tree. One thing that's a little bit unusual about Blight is that so much of the power is concentrated in Blight Spawn and Distilled Fungus that it's actually perfectly reasonable to take one cluster here, and have that be your only Blight support on the passive tree. If this is the case, you're going to have very low chance for Blight encounters to spawn on your maps, and so you're only going to want to do this if you're in a position where you've got a lot of rusted Blight Scarabs available, and you can potentially use higher than rusted if you want. Now, when you do this, you will find that you will be getting a bunch of oils and oil extractors, and you will also be getting Distilled Fungus proccing and dropping a whole bunch of anointed jewelry items. This is a farming strategy that is quite close on the Atlas passive tree to a couple of nodes you might already be taking, Vivid Memories, and in particular Remnants of the Past. And as a result, it's something that you can easily fit into certain strategies with only a small investment in Blight. This is very different to something like Abyss, where you probably don't want to even start down this 16 long track unless you're willing to take all of it. And once you're taking all of it, you're also committing yourself to taking Abyssal Army as well, and potentially more of the Abyss support. Blight is something that has a nice self-contained small package that you can pick up for something like 13 or 14 points if you're already reasonably close to it on the passive tree. Finally, I want to discuss the keystones that warp your entire Atlas design. Grand Design is the first one here, and the answer here is no, just no. The small nodes for Blight are so good that there is no way you would consider taking Grand Design in conjunction with a Blight tree. However, Wandering Path is very different. Notable Atlas passive skills grant nothing, 100% increased effect of small Atlas passive skills. There are a lot of very, very good small nodes available for Blight, and ultimately, this is one of the mechanics that synergizes best with the Wandering Path Atlas. For example, consider the Fungal Bloom cluster. Fungal Bloom itself is 10% chance to contain a Blight encounter. The small nodes leading up to it are 12% total. So if you take Wandering Path, then you're spending 1 less point in this cluster, which is already significant, and you are getting 24% chance to contain a Blight encounter rather than 22%. So this makes the cluster better and makes it cost 1 less point. Additionally, you get to spec these Blight Tower cost nodes. 80% reduced cost of building and upgrading Blight Towers is tremendous. So definitely keep this in mind. A Wandering Path Atlas passive tree, if you already want to use it because of other mechanics, definitely will work with Blight. Just be aware that you will not get the ability to take advantage of oil extractors, nor these drops of anointed jewelry items. But the payoff is there in other ways, and this is one of the mechanics it is absolutely best with. Anyways, I am going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results.